You put in the hours, sweat the details, go the extra mile. You don't settle. Neither should your construction site office. Atco trailers keep up with the work you're doing. Made locally, they're newer, better equipped, and ready to go when you are. With dedicated sales and service, Atco trailers are the hardest working on site, next to you. Visit atco.com/structures to learn more.
Welcome to the Zweig Letter podcast, putting architectural, engineering, planning, and environmental consulting advice and guidance in your ear. Zweig Group's team of experts have spent more than 3 decades elevating the industry by helping AEP and environmental consulting firms thrive. And these podcasts deliver invaluable management, industry, client, marketing, and HR advice directly to you, free of charge. The Zweig Letter podcasts, elevating the design industry one episode at a time.
Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of the Zweig Letter podcast. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and I'm excited to be with you as always. We've got a great episode for you today. One of the things that we had a previous guest on the podcast that said to us, and it would be really great to maybe kind of capture the thinking of a number of different firms, technological firms that serve the design industry, to be featured on the Zweig Letter podcast. And so we've had Christopher Parsons on from Knowledge Architecture. We've had the folks from Tonic DM on, and now we're having Peter Johann on from Pirros. And Peter is the COO of Pirros. Is that correct, Peter?
Correct.
Okay,
yes.
Good. That's what I thought. All right. So Peter is the COO of Pirros, and he is joining us today on the podcast to talk a little bit about his background and his experience. He is a design professional that has crossed over, if you will, into the IT or technology space and is providing solutions for the design industry through his firm, which was also, you guys were also a part of Y Combinator. Is that correct?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay,
a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, we don't want to forget that. But anyway, we're just excited to have you on board today to join us on the Zweig Letter podcast. I would love for you just to give a quick introduction to our audience and let them know a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we'll get into Pirros.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thanks for having me on, Randy. Yeah, a little introduction myself, Peter. I grew up, I was a structural engineer by trade. I worked at a structural engineering firm called KPFF, which is a big structural engineering firm up and down the West Coast. They have offices countrywide now. And I worked there for a while down in LA before starting a company with one of my colleagues, Pirros, which is a software solution for design professionals, specifically for structural engineers and architects. And so we noticed an issue that we were having within our company at KPFF. I was working on this technology design group with one of my colleagues who I actually had gone to college with as well. And we noticed that there wasn't really a solution to this problem across the industry. And so we started our own company to address this problem. We started it about 2 years ago and, went through Y Combinator about a year and a half ago, and it's been off to the races since then. So that's a little background on myself.
Well, yeah, I love that. And I love the fact that you had an itch rather, and you scratched it, right? With your own solution. Can you maybe walk us through the problem that you recognized and how you have created Pirros to solve that problem?
Absolutely. So Pirros is a detail management platform. So what we do is we create detail libraries and a detailed database for these firms. So, details, which I'm sure people in the design industry are very familiar with, right? A beam to column connection, a wall assembly. There's hundreds of them on projects. And a lot of them can be reused from project to project, right? We don't need to redesign the same beam to column connection for every project. And what we noticed is that what ended up happening a lot at these firms is there was no really good way to manage these hundreds of details across all the different projects that were being produced. So people were having to spend a lot of time looking through previous projects to find the right details to reuse on their current project. And a lot of times they were redesigning the same detail over and over because they didn't know where to look. They hadn't worked on a project with that same detail, but one of their colleagues across the office had done it 2 years ago. And so what our software does is it's able to kind of capture all of the different details across the different projects, put it into one centralized location and searchable location to provide efficient and reliable access to any of those details. So it streamlines the detailed production process within these design firms.
So in terms of just doing all of that, did you find that it smoothed out your internal process before you actually started Pirros and started doing this?
So not really. I mean, we wanted to, that was part of our software development group, right? We were developing in-house tools to combat the problems that we were facing or to help our firm out. And we got to this problem, and it was a little bit too big of an endeavor to do in-house, what we realized. And also, it wasn't just a problem that our firm was experiencing. It seemed like a very similar problem across companies. And that's why we decided to leave the company and start this company to service not just KPFF, but other structural engineering firms and architectural firms as well. So it's a tool that we wanted to use when we were at KPFF. But of course, we developed it after, so we never got to use it. But now, of course, KPFF is using it and really enjoying the solution.
So my question to you would be, as I'm listening to you share this, is simply, why? I mean, you could have done anything, right? I mean, you're an engineer by training classically. What wired you differently to decide that, I'm going to switch gears now and stop designing for the built environment, but design and augment and create something that serves the built environment? How did you, did you kind of decide to make that switch? Because I know that's not an easy switch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think it was a combination of a bunch of different factors. But kind of first and foremost, both me and my colleague really liked structural engineering. We liked the design side of it. But I think that we saw the trajectory of our career within the structural engineering industry. And we're like, hey, we have an opportunity to do something that's like really exciting to us, right? Start our own company. And I think that a lot of people can start their own company within structural engineering, right? They start their own structural engineering practice. But we saw this as an opportunity to maybe jumpstart that, right? And we could start our own company at a pretty young age. And we thought that this was the best avenue for us to be successful with starting our own company.
And it's funny you say that, because I know I've been involved with this industry for a long time. And one of the challenges that we're always talking with leaders about in the C-suite and otherwise and in a multitude of design firms is that you have to create a way for your younger people to see what the future looks like. Was it that you saw that the future, that the trajectory that you were originally on as a structural engineer, the timing and everything else was going to be markedly different than had you pivoted the way that you did to start Pirros and go that route, right? Because I mean, I have nothing but love for your approach to this. Because I mean, I think you epitomize your generation in the fact that you see a solution, a problem, you want to provide a solution for it, and then you kind of go all in, right? Which is not the way things might have been had you kind of been born 20 years earlier, right? You might have just said, you know what, I'm just going to put my time in. I'm going to be a structural engineer. I'm going to work my way to the top, and it's going to take me 15 or 20 years to get there. But that's not the case for your generation. And I would love for you just to kind of speak to that mindset, because I think it is a mindset that is sometimes lost by the graying leadership of the design industry. And you are the epitome of that. And first of all, I applaud you for the work that you guys are doing with Pirros. And I always tell people to go after what you want. And you guys did that. But I'd love for you just to maybe just talk a little bit about that, because I think there's some kernels of truth in there for leadership to take on and think about as they're training this next generation of design professionals.
Absolutely. No, yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. I think you touched on it, right? Like, I don't think 20 years ago this would be an option for us. And I think that's what we also recognized. We had this very unique opportunity, and the stars kind of aligned for us to do this, right? We were both kind of in the same mindset and both really bought into this problem and this solution. And it was the right point in our lives. But also, yeah, there's so many resources at our disposal now to start a company, and especially like a software company. I mean, there's a million reasons why we wouldn't be able to do it 20 years ago. But also, I think just, yeah, the mindset of like, this is something that a lot of people are doing now, and a lot of people are doing at a younger age. And I think when my initial hesitation was, hey, I'm in my late 20s, right? I don't have nearly enough kind of expertise or experience or anything to start my own company. And I think that's a mindset that a lot of people have, and a hesitation to why people will start their own thing later rather than earlier. And, doing a kind of a bunch of research before I actually realized, hey, this is actually the right time. This is the perfect time. I have the flexibility and the opportunity to start my own company rather than I need to wait 10, 15, 20 years to get that experience. And I think that is a trend that we're seeing a lot these days. I mean, even you mentioned the Y Combinator startup accelerator program that we went through. I mean, the size of that program has, especially the number of applicants, is grown exponentially in recent years. And like being a startup founder now is so much more mainstream than it was, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, I'd say. So it's certainly a trend that we're seeing. And I think that definitely contributed to us seeing that this was a realistic opportunity and not just like a pipe dream for us at this current time.
Yeah, I love that. And so I think, and what I hear you saying is that, and maybe this would have been the case, that certainly as a 20-something, opening up your own structural engineering firm would seem like a daunting task compared to starting a software company and, maybe kind of following a lane that, a road less traveled as far as that's concerned. I'm curious to know, when you were in Y Combinator and there were a lot of different companies serving different verticals and different industries, were there any other companies that had ideas like you had to serve the design industry, or were you one of one?
Yeah, very, very few. Within Y Combinator, it's one of the biggest accelerator programs. So they have 2 batches a year. They call it batches. And within our batch, there was probably, I think, 250 companies. And I want to say we were either the only one or maybe one of 2 that were focusing on the design space. I think there was a few other construction tech companies, but 80% of the companies right now are, AI for this, AI for that, for sales, for fintech, for developer tools, right? Very few are focused on the design industry. And that was also, kind of going back to your first question, that was part of what we noticed and why we were really motivated to do this, is we just saw a lack of kind of new software being developed for the design industry specifically. And therefore there was a lot of just like easy opportunities. And, it's part of the reason why we want to do this in the first place. It was surprising to us that this solution didn't already exist, right? And it makes a little bit more sense to us now. It's not a sexy industry for the technology industry to produce solutions for. And it also requires, I think a lot of these solutions require a really in-depth understanding of the workflows within these firms. And therefore it requires expertise of someone who's worked in the industry before. And again, not a lot of people that go into the industry end up going into tech. So there's a bunch of different reasons why there's not a lot of startups and not a lot of new technology companies that are catering to the AEC industry.
As I'm sitting here hearing you talk, I'm sure there's somebody that's going to watch this and it's going to say, man, this, Peter was so brave to step out of his comfort zone to do this. A couple of questions that I have for you. One is, did you feel like you were wired for this type of business, or was it more of you just kind of figured things out as you went and you knew the problem and you figured out a way to just come up with a solution in an area that you didn't have as much comfort and experience in as you had as a civil engineer?
Absolutely. Definitely the latter. I think this is a little different mindset than my partner. I think my partner had always, or for a longer period of time, had thought about doing something like this. For me, I had never really thought that this was ever going to be my path. And it just kind of stumbled into it. And at the very beginning, I went in, eyes wide open, and was more so just excited for the opportunity to do this rather than feeling like I was the right person for it. But that's part of building a company, is you can't really know, and you can't be good at it before you actually do it. The only way to progress in your journey is to actually just go ahead and do it. And so I think I've developed into someone who's now a good fit for our type of company, but certainly wasn't one going in.
Yeah, and I have to imagine that you guys, you have to probably pinch yourself every day that you come into work, right? Getting to do what you're doing now, because not only are you able to exercise your skill set and background and experience as a structural engineer, but you're also able to work on something totally brand new. Is KPFF now a client?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, they are.
All right. So basically, firms that you were working with or competing against while you were with them as you created Pirros, have now become clients of yours and companies that you are providing your solutions to.
Yeah, absolutely. A bunch of structural engineering firms on the West Coast are now using it that compete with KPFF, Dayton Cole, Walter P. Moore, Bueller Engineering, John A. Martin, a bunch of them. And they're all using the solution, and partly because, it was just something that did not exist in the industry. And again, still really don't have a direct competitor to it, which is interesting, but something that was a need for these firms, which is why these firms are adopting it.
So are you and your partner kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop in terms of competitors, or what are you doing to kind of like distance yourself from everybody else since you are an early adopter and a one of one, if you will?
Yeah. I mean, there's two things. One, we're continuing to develop the product, talking to our customers. I mean, you can't kind of a mindset that you have that the Y Combinator instilled in us is don't spend 2 years building a product, right? Build at what is called an MVP, a minimum viable product, and then have people start using it. And that will guide you to get to the best product, right? Is what your customers and users want and are going to get value from. So the one side is developing the product through our customers, right? Instead of just saying, hey, we think this is the right way to do it. Let's talk to our customers and figure out what the way they want to do it, right? And then the other way we're differentiating is we're just growing our customer base. Our tool inherently is something that does cause a little bit of an initial hurdle to get in. You have to kind of build out your database with all your firm's information. But once firms are up and running, then it's a very sticky tool, right? It's not something that you're just going to be able to switch off of really quickly. And so just building up that customer base is providing ourselves with a really good kind of foundation within the architectural and engineering industry.
So tell me, in terms of the way that your product works, your solution, what kind of time are you saving your clients when they utilize Pirros?
Yeah, absolutely. It's twofold. So it's on the detailed production process. And I'd say this is where majority of time is saved in terms of not having to search, like I mentioned, right? Not having to track down different details, searching across different projects. It's a lot of word of mouth to find the right details. So asking your colleagues or your project manager or someone at your firm, hey, have you done this specific detail before? And then having to dig through, your company's server and 3 different PDF sets of different projects to track down the right detail. And then also you have to track down the Revit model, which is where these details are designed, open up that Revit model, upgrade that Revit model, and download it into a new project. That all is a very time-consuming task for producing details on drawings that we reduce. And then, like I also mentioned, you're finding closer starting point details. So instead of finding a wall assembly detail that is 50% of the way there, and you have to spend another half an hour kind of modifying and then tweaking it, let's get a detail that's 80% of the way there. We can provide reliable access to those details that maybe you wouldn't never come to, right? Because you wouldn't know where to look. And so that's all on the detailed production side. And then what a lot of these firms end up doing is it's not like they're going through past projects for every detail. A lot of these firms tried to build a detail library without our software. And it's a lot more of a manual and time consuming task to compile these details from different projects into a central location. And there's nothing to help them with that process. And so our tooling helps them kind of build a more refined group of details to create standardization across their projects.
Okay. So I totally hear that. And that makes perfect sense, right? Because I mean, why reinvent the wheel when you've created a repository for how people can set this thing up really fast when it comes to putting together the detailed production process. And I love you saying build a library without your software, which a lot of companies do. So when a company comes to you and they've kind of showed you that they've done that, how do you then show them how Pirros can help them avoid that in the future?
Yeah. So building the library, it's not a one-time process. It's a constantly evolving and dynamic thing because these firms are constantly producing new details, right? And so say a firm has spent a lot of time, a couple of years ago to build out their library, and that's great, but details constantly get updated. There's new code cycles, there's changes in the field, different stuff arises. So you're constantly updating the details in that library. And then also there's constantly new details being produced that need to be added to that library. And so the issues with this library, we had one at KPFF, is that, it's a lot of effort and time to update and manage. And then also they're just limited to a subset of details. So it's never going to capture everything. There's always going to be going back to past projects for details, which, as I described before, is a very inefficient and unreliable process. And so the goal is to reduce going back to past projects as much as possible. And that's what our software does. When firms successfully implement our software, one, they're going to build out what I call a vetted library of details. So a library in the traditional sense. But then also, if that detail's not in that library already, then at least they'll be able to search through their past projects within our platform and not waste all that time looking through their projects on their server.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So I'm curious to know what is some of the feedback that you've received from some of your newer clients when they really kind of fully embrace all that Pirros has to offer? What are you usually hearing from clients? Like, where have you been all my life besides that? What are they saying to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part, we see a wide range between our customer base. We have some customers that are using the platform a ton, and we have some other customers that it's taking a little bit more to activate their user base. And so when we talk to some of our customers that are being really successful with it, we're like, hey, how did you get everybody to use it? And they're just like, well, like, duh, like it's just way easier to use your software, right? It's almost like we kind of ask them like, why do you enjoy using our software? And they're like, isn't it obvious? Why? It's just an obvious solution to an obvious problem. And then on the other side, I think the big challenge, and this is, I wouldn't say as specific to our software specifically, it's more with workflow tools and software platforms is, our software is inherently something that we need to get everybody within a firm to start using. And that change management and that initial adoption, when someone has done a certain workflow or process the same way their entire career for 20 years, it's going to require a little bit of activation energy to get them to change their ways. I mean, all humans are creatures of habit, right? And so I think that when we get feedback from software, and we have had companies that haven't renewed our service, right? It's not because they haven't enjoyed the software. It's because we haven't figured out how to get everybody to change their workflow. And so that's a big initiative within our company. And it requires a little bit of effort up front, but it's always worth it on the back end, because once we get people using the platform and then they're getting the value from it and everybody really enjoys it, because again, it's a kind of an obvious solution to an obvious problem.
Yeah. And I got to imagine, I mean, what you were describing is kind of like churn when you lose clients that you already had. And so I would imagine that your churn rate is probably a lot lower than a normal software company, just by virtue of what you're doing and the problems that you're solving with Pirros. So I think that more than anything else is exciting, and it shows the need for more firms like Pirros to pop up that provide augmented solutions for design professionals.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the churn rate, it's something that our tools, and like I mentioned before, inherently sticky because we're uploading a lot of information. And the reason why we have yet to have a firm churn because they're like, hey, I don't like this software, or I don't, people didn't want to use it or had bad experiences. It's purely we don't have a good reason why we're not renewing. We just didn't get our users to use it in the first place, to even experience it. And so that's always the challenge, especially the challenge with us.
Well, and I think that is not a unique situation for the design industry, because design professionals tend to wring their hands a lot when going through and trying new things, even if it is the best thing since sliced bread, right? It's like, but the constant refrain that we've always heard, and I've heard it since 97. Yeah, but that's not how we've always done things, right? And when you hear people say that, it's like, oh Lord, here we go again. It's that old wineskin mentality. It never changes. And so this industry is going to continue to evolve. And especially as your generation and the generation that comes after you starts to matriculate through the design industry, I think we're going to see more and more change take place, and people will embrace it faster, right? So like where you say, oh, well, it's going to take 5 to 7 years for Pirros to get to a level of adoption that's across the board. In 10 years, that might be 2 to 3. So I would imagine it's going to get faster and faster.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that is these firms are going to have systems in place for change management. And I think we're seeing this at larger firms right now, and they're placing a lot of importance on that. But a lot of the firms that we sell to, 20, 50, 100, 200 employees, they're a little bit they don't have that system in place, right? And it's more of a like, hey, we're placing our emphasis on evaluating the software. We think the software is going to be good. We buy the software, and then they think their job, the people that are tasked with implementing the software, they think their job's done, really. And they don't, recognize or have a system in place for that change management. And I think that, that is just, people are going to recognize how important that is, because a lot of these solutions are really good solutions for their firm. But the missing piece of the puzzle is that change management. And they'll recognize that that is just as important as the valuation, right? If we can evaluate a tool and get it all right, if we don't implement it properly, we're not getting any value. So I think these firms are just going to get better at it and recognize the importance of it more.
So in your market research, I'm curious to know, have you found that larger firms have an in-house thing that they've kind of duct taped together before or they don't have anything at all?
No, there's other software that can do something adjacent to what we do. They're called content management systems. So most of these firms have those. They're not real solutions to detail management. We talked about a detail library before. They're just a way to host their existing detail library, but they're still looking through past projects a ton for details. It's still a very manual process to build out that library. And these firms are facing all the same challenges that our current customers do. But again, with these larger companies, I think that change management part's even bigger, right? Changing the workflow for 50 people is easier than changing it for 3,000 people. And so that part takes a longer time and needs to be done a little bit more carefully.
Yeah. I mean, I think design professionals and companies should really hear that, it's kind of like when you were growing up and you went to the library and you would have to go to the reference section to pull out books and information like that. You guys have and are, for the clients that you have, are creating larger and larger reference sections where you don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel every time, but that everything is there. And so one thing builds upon another. And I mean, it makes for a much better work experience. And it also allows you to utilize your time a lot more efficiently.
Absolutely. I think that's a great analogy, right? It's called a detail library. And back in the day, they had, a book that you flip through of details, and you can think of it just like a normal library, right? You have to go and ask the person what section it's on, and you have to go to the section and look through the shelf, and you have to then find the detail or the book that you're looking for. And then what our software is, it's like Amazon, right? You just come and you search for the book you're looking for, and you find it, and you click buy, and you in our version, you put it into your project. And so it's kind of a great analogy for what our software does.
Yeah. And when you say click buy, I'm saying it's probably more like one click, right? Where it's so easy. All you literally have to do is click and it's done. And then you just get a notice that this is going to be shipped to you in the next day or so, depending on where you are in the country. So, well, man, this has been great. I really appreciate you kind of giving us an inside look and view at Pirros. And man, I'm going to grab my popcorn and sit on the sidelines and watch you guys continue to grow, because I think your story is unique, but it won't be for long. And what I mean by that is that a lot more design professionals are going to hear what you're doing and see the examples that you're setting and say, you know what, that's what I want to do. And it's not that they're going to leave the industry, but that they're going to be industry adjacent and are going to find ways to serve this industry that will allow design firms to just be more efficient in the future, because that's really what you're doing at Pirros. And you're creating opportunities that didn't exist a few years ago. And so I can only imagine what things are going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years as you probably incorporate AI into the workflow, as you create new opportunities. So it's going to be exciting, man, to see you guys really grow this. And I really appreciate you sharing, having a little transparency and sharing about your transition out of a traditional design firm into a startup that serves the industry, right? Because I think you don't necessarily have a lot of people, some people are leaving this industry, but you don't necessarily have to leave the industry to serve it. And so I don't want especially the young people that are listening to this, I want you to hear that very clearly. I think Peter's story is an important one, and it's one that can be mimicked and copied in the future for other people that have really good ideas and ways that they can provide services and products that can help this industry work more efficiently. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn's always a good method. Email me. We're on various forums, but I think LinkedIn is probably the best way to kind of reach out and contact me and find me in a professional. And
what's the Pirros website?
Pirros.com.
Okay, perfect. Pirros.com. And we'll make sure we put all of that in the show notes so that folks can reach out to Peter and learn a little bit more, I would certainly encourage you to connect with him on LinkedIn. And if you have some questions after watching this episode, just say, hey, I heard about you on the Zweig Letter podcast, and I'd love to just pick your brain on this or that. Don't pick it too hard because he's got a lot of work to do with Pirros, but certainly we appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to connect with us. And like I said, one of the things is we're aggregating a number of episodes, including the one with Christopher Parsons and others that are serving this industry in an exemplary way to create more awareness, right? Because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that watch this and are like, I had never heard of these guys, but I need to know them. And so we'll make sure that you're able to get in contact with Peter and also in contact with Pirros to learn how they might be able to solve some of the problems internally that you have within your design firm. So Peter Johann, thank you so much for joining us today on the Zweig Letter podcast. We really appreciate it, and we will certainly be in touch to see how things continue to progress. And we may need to have a part 2 to this down the line as you continue to expand and grow this fabulous startup. So we wish you nothing but continued success, and we want to thank you again for taking time to be with us today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on. Absolutely.
Well, there you have it, folks. We really appreciate you sticking with us and watching this episode of the Zweig Letter podcast. Listen, to learn more about the Zweig Letter podcast, you can visit us at zweiggroup.com. You can learn about our management consulting services. You can learn about all of the products, the great books, the surveys, all that we have to offer. We've got great conferences, great events like the Principals Academy and so many other events that we do on a regular basis. So we really want to encourage you to just visit us at zweiggroup.com to learn about all of the offerings that Zweig Group has. And as always, just tune in, follow the Zweig Letter podcast, check out the latest and greatest stories like the one we just shared today with Peter Johann from Pirros and the amazing work that they're doing. It's all about the design industry. You guys are responsible for the built environment, and we want to continue to celebrate all of the amazing work that you do on a regular basis. And that's essentially the goal and the focus of the Zweig Letter podcast. So that's all I have for you today. We will see you back here very soon with another new episode of the Zweig Letter podcast. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and we'll see you soon. Peace.
Thanks for tuning in to the Zweig Letter podcast. We hope that you can be part of elevating the industry and that you can apply our advice and information to your daily professional life. For a free digital subscription to the Zweig Letter, please visit thezweigletter.com/subscribe to gain more wisdom and inspiration, in addition to information about leadership, finance, HR, and marketing your firm. Subscribe today.